So I have an especially hard act to follow, but actually all day has been a hard act to follow. This has been really great and really eye-opening. And three big themes, I think, have come shining through to us all today. Creativity, community, and passion. And I am going to share with you over the next 18 minutes a story of a passionate, creative community that went out in search of popularity, of prosperity, and respect. It's the story of what happened when they found those things. And it's the story of what happens next. Has anybody here seen this little movie that came out a couple of weeks ago called The Avengers? You know, guy in armor and big green dude and stuff like that. If you saw it, you're not alone. I saw recently that it has passed $1 billion in global box office. It is on track to become the highest grossing film in cinema history, based on a comic book. Anybody here watch Walking Dead? Yeah, right? Zombies and guns, stuff blowing up. Top-rated show on cable television, based on a comic book. Now we're at TED here, so maybe we have some intellectuals in the house. Anybody see the last, I don't know, it was 2 or 3 issues ago of the New Yorker, and they did a 16-page feature on one of the most interesting literary figures of this century, a woman named Alison Bechdel, who wrote a great award-winning book called Fun Home, and she has a new book coming out about her struggles dealing with her mother. These are graphic novels. Alison Bechdel does comic books. She calls them something else, but they are in fact comic books. Isn't this interesting? That this medium that started out on the fringes of the entertainment business and of the culture has found its way to the center of both. As somebody who's a stone-cold nerd, like this interested me personally, but I'm lucky enough in my professional life to actually get to think about this stuff for a living, and thinking about the trajectory of the comics business and the future of pop culture in the context of what's going on today in terms of technology is really fascinating. And as Craig said, the perfect metaphor for all of this stuff that's going on is the San Diego Comiccon. For those of you who don't know, the San Diego Comiccon is this extravaganza that takes over the city of San Diego for 5 days in July. And it gets over 150,000 people from around the world who attend this. It features some of the top names in the entertainment industry, in video games, in movies, in comics, in art, in all kinds of different things. It has become really the pulsing heart of pop culture in North America, if not the world. It was not always this way. 40 years ago when Comic-Con began, it was probably not much bigger than that Marvel convention in Tukwila. Right? In 40 years we're going to hear Marvel's the motion picture. But seriously, the people 40 years ago who took comics seriously beyond the age of, say, 11 were kind of unusual. And they had a real passion for the art form, and they thought there's something here, there's something in these stories, there's something in this art, there's something in this medium that is more worthwhile than it's getting credit for. And they got together in these groups, they formed a community around their passion, and over time, they have taken over. This is part of the 500,000 square foot exhibit space at Comic-Con. This is part of the crowd of 150,000 people. And also during these 5 days in July, there are thousands of hours of programming that goes on literally around the clock. In meeting rooms, in party spaces, in all over the convention center and everywhere else. It is absolutely an incredible convergence of stuff. Moreover, it has become a media event. If you turn on your TV sometime during the early weeks of July, you will probably see images like this. Fans dressed up as their favorite characters. Huge media celebrities standing in front of the Comic-Con banner because they're talking about their new movie with 6,500 fans who get to come up to the microphone and ask them questions. Really unique experience to interact with the people who make their art. There are these properties that started out as comics that get discovered at Comic-Con and blow up into the next big thing. And then of course there's giant robots. What's actually going on at Comic-Con underneath this media perception is a convergence of a whole bunch of subcultures. All of this stuff that's filling the screen, there are thousands of people there that this is their life. They collect toy robots. They collect manga. They're really into Japanese monster movies. whatever you can think of that has a connection to pop culture is at Comic-Con in force, and the amount of energy and enthusiasm that comes through with this is really stupendous. And over the last 10 years, it has grown exponentially and has become this pop culture singularity. And it is being driven, it has become this because it represents a step forward that satisfies some of the business imperatives of the entertainment industry. Now, some of you may have heard this term transmedia. Right? Transmedia is a big word for a simple concept. It means basically taking stories that originate in one media format, like comics or books or whatever, and turning them into something else, like movies or video games. And in the current climate that we're in, where the media space is monopolized by 3 or 4 really big companies, Time Warner, Disney, Fox, NBC, Universal, the usual suspects. They also own all of these IP assets. Disney bought Marvel a few years ago for $4 billion, for example. And that's going to look like the deal of the century pretty soon. But these companies that own all of these channels have an imperative to fill up these channels with the content that they own so they can sell you more stuff. And technology is providing them with more platforms for this story. So take a character like Batman. In a few weeks, we are going to see Batman: The Dark Knight Rises. If anything can knock the Avengers off of its perch, it's going to be this. This is the 3rd in the Batman series, right? It's a hugely popular, creatively well-realized movie adaptation of Batman. Batman also has benefited from several generations of really well-produced animated cartoons that bring young viewers into this world, that introduce this character to a new generation so that they get the motives, they get the stories, they get the villains, they're sort of indoctrinated into the coolness of Batman so that they then become potential customers for some of this other stuff. For people who like the physicality of these characters, there's toys, there's merchandise, there's Happy Meals, there's costumes, there's all kinds of other stuff that they will sell you to help you participate in this brand that they've built, around this great idea of this sort of vigilante who goes out there and rights wrongs and does justice. For those of you who want to be Batman and are not a billionaire orphan with a few screws loose, the best substitute is these video games like Batman Arkham City, which is an award-winning, best-selling video game that actually puts you into the world of Batman in a really immersive way, and it captures a lot of these young people, and not so young people, who really want to go out there and have that visceral experience of beating up the bad guys. This multi-billion-dollar entertainment property, it should be noted, originated 70 years ago in the pages of a comic book that cost 10 cents, developed by 2 teenage kids from New York, one of whom got credit and one didn't, and was developed story by story, issue by issue, year by year, in the pages of this humble and despised medium. What is it about comics that makes it such a hotbed for these properties? Right, first of all, comics is a really approachable art form. It's economically approachable because comics themselves are cheap. At least they used to be. So a lot of people sort of pick them up and read them and things like that. But it's also, there are some comics that it is literally easier to read them than to not read them. It's lines on the page, bright colors, it's simplified text. You don't have to be Einstein to read a comic book. Starting in the 1960s, some people with some really powerful artistic imaginations and big styles came into the business and started telling these stories that were incredibly compelling, that developed issue over issue and really brought a lot of people in. This is from Jack Kirby's Fantastic Four, which is sort of a cornerstone of the artistic achievement of the superhero comic. Later on, more serious artists and literary figures started using the medium of comics to explore their own voices. This is from Art Spiegelman's Pulitzer Prize-winning Mouse comic from 1986. The movie industry started getting better at bringing these fantasies to life in a realistic way, in a way that didn't make you say, that doesn't look so good. Right? And as this has happened, then the next shoe to drop is comics in digital format. So if anybody has a tablet device, comics are the killer app for tablets. Comics are the perfect content type for tablet PCs. So all of this stuff, all of this industry momentum, all of this artistic and technological momentum has come together in what I call peak geek. It's this cultural moment where everybody suddenly wants to be part of comics culture. It's not only Comic-Cons like the Summit City Comic-Con that you had here and other ones around the country setting attendance records. It's big Hollywood stars that want to be part of this, that this is actually a preferred part of their portfolio now. It is brands like DC Comics, which is part of Warner Brothers, that used to be sort of in the closet, they didn't even want to admit that they did comics, is now out front as their lead brand to bring in young people. You've got, anybody watch Big Bang Theory? Yeah. Produced by Warner Brothers as a great vehicle to get their iconography out into public, on Sheldon's t-shirts. People who don't know what these characters are, what these symbols are, suddenly encounter them in the comic book store. And it's suddenly, these are well-adjusted adult people, relatively speaking, who, despite the fact that they're comics fans, actually have girlfriends and lives and things like that. This is it's a big, it gets better message. You have media devoted to the geek market. Things like the G4 network and MTV Geek and Attack of the Show actually aggregates all of this stuff into this big, all-consuming, unified field theory of pop culture that spans from music and extreme sports to comics to video games to all of this stuff. And everybody in this culture is a celebrity in their own terms. And then finally, you've got the explosion of digital comics. That we've sort of solved this bottleneck. You don't have to go into the comic store anymore to enjoy this material. You can get it delivered directly downloaded onto your device. And this has opened up the market in a huge way, and it's kind of come out of nowhere to become the economic success story of 2012. So where do we go from here? The futurist in me looks at this situation and it says, this is great, comics have arrived, they're here, what next? And as far as I can see, there's actually a couple of ways that you can go once you have surmounted peak geek. On one hand, comics can maintain and expand this new audience that they've gotten. They can continue to be a popular art form. But the other thing that can happen is that the audience that has been cheaply won can be easily lost. And then maybe Hollywood gets bored of comics. Maybe people get bored of these kind of big stories, and comics goes back to being a niche medium. And that's okay, that can happen. But it has some business implications that we're not thinking about right now because the money is rolling in, pockets are full. The other thing that can happen is we can continue on this trend toward consolidation, where comics and the entertainment industry is controlled by these 4 or 5 big monopolies that own all of this content and own all of the channels, and that the fan culture that has propelled comics becomes a more motivated form of consumerism, and it kind of loses that edgy community and that bottom-up, do-it-yourself feel that has given it so much energy. But at the same time that we're seeing consolidation, we're also seeing unprecedented democratization of access to creative channels and creative medium. Anybody can do it themselves. So right now there's a big tension in the world about whether self-publishing and self-distributed media is going to prevail over these old big legacy models based on intellectual property ownership and branding and legal protections and all of these sorts of things. We don't know really how that's going to break down. So the futurist in me does not see one future ahead for popular culture. It actually sees forward. I'm going to spend the last 5 minutes just sort of going through what some of these possibilities are for what happens when you get what you want artistically and commercially, and where do you go. Scenario number 1 is one I call endless summer. And this is where the big guys win. This is the future that everybody is investing in right now, which is where you have big companies that are controlling the content, that are controlling the brands, that are selling you stuff, they're producing very slick, big, well-produced, well-done, intelligent content, but they're doing it on a big scale, and they're doing it for purely commercial reasons. This is, again, this is what the shareholders of Disney are hoping for. But it's not necessarily the best future for the people that have a real emotional investment in the content, because corporate content with your favorite characters isn't quite the same as the spark that comes from the individual voice. The other thing that could happen is that we could maintain this corporate ownership, but we could retreat into this niche environment. Those of you who are comic nerds like me in the audience know this term infinite crisis, right? Every summer, the comic book companies put out these big, long storylines designed to sell you stacks of issues. And they all have these big, pompous titles like, Crisis on Infinite Earths and all of this stuff. This is a world where comics go back to being for the fans, and only for the fans. And that there's sort of a hardcore, aging audience that goes for their tried and true favorites, and that this sort of outside force goes away. And then we're back to the Marvel convention in Tukwila. But you know what, if you were one of the 150 people in that room who had a real dedicated devotion to this stuff, maybe that's not so bad. The flip side of this scenario is, so what if comics decline in commercial salience, but maintain themselves as an art form? And that all of this fascinating, interesting work, Ghost World is a comic book by Daniel Klaus. It was made into a movie starring Scarlett Johansson, who does not wear a catsuit in that movie. But anyway, it's a very artistically successful, interesting comic. It sold like 50 issues or something like that. But there is this this sort of hotbed of self-created, really personal content that's really reaching seriously thinking audiences. What if comics goes from being this big thing to being something smaller? What if comics becomes jazz? What if comics becomes a niche medium for connoisseurs and loses this mass appeal? This is also a possible direction from the moment that we're standing at. To me, the most optimistic scenario is this one that mixes the bottom-up creative energy that's coming not only from new creators and new voices, but from people all over the world, taking advantage of these channels to come out and publish their own work in all kinds of different ways, so that there's room for the big stories and the small stories, that there's room for Superman and the 99, which is a Middle Eastern superhero story, and The Guild, which is kind of a self-published web series that's become a comic book, and all of this kind of stuff. One sign pointing toward this is the rise of self-publishing. Last year, when the Kindle came out, right before Christmas, everybody bought the Kindle Fire. They found it under their Christmas tree. And they went to go and download content to put in this. #1 selling digital downloaded graphic novel was not Watchmen or Superman or anything like that. It wasn't The Walking Dead. It was a thing called How to Be a Supervillain. Self-published comic by a young woman named Rachel Yu. No publisher. Rachel Yu is 14 years old. That was her third book. Expanding multiverse. Which one of these is the real future? The thing is, because popular culture isn't just consumer culture, we, the fans, are co-creators of this media. That our interaction, our voices, especially at places like Comiccon, but anywhere that you can make your voice heard, influences this conversation. Right? This isn't just about being dictated to by the big companies, and it's not just about whether comics reaches the maximum audience or just the audience of dedicated fans. We can push this in the direction that we want. Comics is an open-ended medium, and it's very approachable, and so is the future. So I would leave you with this idea that in terms of the future of pop culture, the lines may be ruled on the page, but it is up to us to write the story and to fill in the pictures. Thank you all so much.